Everyone says the suburbs are boring. Cookie-cutter houses with their matching mailboxes, that awkward half-smile you give Mrs. Peterson at the Kroger, and Mr. Hanley's weekly drama about how long the Wilson's trash cans sit at the curb. For me, though, boring was my security blanket, my invisibility cloak in a world that had always seen too much of me. Nobody asked questions when I transformed our musty basement into my personal sanctuary. That's exactly why I stayed with my parents at 26, long after my high school friends escaped to their downtown apartments. My mom, Arlene, couponer extraordinaire, and Dad, Todd, champion of the 6 a.m. lawn mowing, pretended it was about helping me save for a house. But we all knew the truth. I wasn't ready to step into a world that had spent years chewing me up and spitting me out. The predictable rhythm of suburban life was my lullaby, my comfort, my fortress against the chaos outside, until the night I heard something clawing beneath my basement floor, scraping away at the last barrier between me and whatever nightmare waited in the dirt below. Most basements reek of old gym socks and that musty coat your grandma keeps forgetting at Christmas. Mine was different. A carefully curated sanctuary that would make any socially anxious 20-something proud. My twin bed was crammed into the corner, topped with the same faded Star Wars sheets I've had since middle school. Darth Vader's mask now barely visible from 1,000 washes. The sagging shelf where I'd arranged my hand-painted miniatures like tiny sentinels. Knights with chipped swords. Wizards whose staffs I'd repainted 3 times. And orcs whose green skin took me 8 attempts to get right. Down there, I could breathe without feeling like someone was judging the sound of my inhale. No one mocked how my voice cracked when I tried ordering coffee. No memory of Tyler Jenkins shoving me into the gym lockers or Ms. Bradshaw calling on me when my hand wasn't raised. No barista at Starbucks staring while I stammered through caramel latte, like each syllable was a mountain to climb. You might say I was hiding. Fair enough. But that basement was also my first real victory. A space where every decision was mine, every comfort earned, every anxiety acknowledged and accommodated. Damn it, Elliot, you're still living in that hole. Dad would grumble when he needed me to pick up his blood pressure medication. Dig any deeper and you'll pop out in China. I'd force a laugh. My dad isn't cruel, just painfully normal. The kind of boomer who thinks anxiety is just another word for laziness. Mom would swoop in with her rescue line. Todd, leave him be, he's happy down there. And she'd give me that look. Eyebrows pulled together, lips pressed into a worried line, silently asking, "But for how long, Elliot?" I never had a good answer. Maybe forever. Maybe until I figured out how to be a person without feeling like I was wearing someone else's skin. Meanwhile, I stocked that basement as if it was Noah's Ark, but for one human. Shelves of MREs because what if grocery stores closed? A hamper of clean towels because what if the water shut off? A first aid kit that would make an ER nurse jealous. The apocalypse was my favorite daydream. I read about it, watched movies about it, played games about it. Of course, I never once imagined the apocalypse would start under my feet. And I definitely didn't think it would wear the faces of people who'd made my teenage years a living hell. It was sometime past midnight on a Monday, or Tuesday technically, but days blurred together when you worked remote IT support like I did. I was hunched over my desk, painting a ridiculous curly beard on a dwarf warrior miniature, when I heard it. Scratch. Scratch. My first thought came out as a mumbled, "Freaking perfect. A rat." Because that's exactly what this basement needed. Then, I froze, brush suspended mid-stroke, ears straining like satellite dishes. The scratching continued. Not the scurry of tiny feet, but something deliberate. Something with purpose. Still, the basement always had its own soundtrack. The furnace kicking on with a wheeze, water rushing through pipes like a distant river. The dryer's death rattle that Dad refused to fix. So I convinced myself I was overthinking it, my specialty, and shuffled back to my half-painted dwarf. 2 days later, I was digging through my emergency supply closet for a bandage because I'd somehow sliced my finger on a Captain Crunch box. Yes, the cardboard edge got me. No, I don't want to talk about it. That's when I heard it. Not scratching this time, but knocking. A desperate thud 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 coming from within the earth itself. My stomach dropped like I'd hit the first hill on a roller coaster, as a chunk of concrete bulged upward, like watching a zit form on the earth's face, ready to pop. Something pushed through. What I saw first looked like a stick wrapped in jerky. Then the smell hit me, the kind of stench that bypasses your nose and goes straight to triggering your gag reflex. And I realized I was looking at a hand, skin like old leather left in the rain, fingernails blackened and jagged. My body's emergency system misfired. Instead of fight or flight, I chose silent paralysis. My feet rooted to the floor like I'd suddenly developed a botanical heritage. The hand wiggled, those nightmare nails scraping at concrete edges, searching for leverage. It found purchase and pushed, revealing a forearm in what might have once been a Letterman jacket sleeve, now shredded and stained with God knows what. I wanted to scream for my parents, but some primitive part of my brain whispered, "What are they gonna do? Die alongside you? Great plan, genius." So I slapped my palm over my mouth and watched as the figure heaved itself through the hole with wet, sucking sounds. And then, like some cosmic punchline to a joke I didn't know was being told, I recognized the face beneath all the rot and dirt. Derek Fuller, who'd made my 8th grade year a special kind of hell. Derek, who'd stuck gum in my hair so often I'd gotten that awful bowl cut. Derek, who'd once taunted me so mercilessly about my Star Wars backpack that I'd faked a stomach virus to escape math class. Derek, whose face haunted my anxiety dreams alongside pop quizzes and public speaking. And here he was, apparently dead for reasons my brain couldn't process, crawling out of my basement floor like the universe's most twisted callback. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. If I had a nickel for every time Derek Fuller haunted my nightmares, I could afford actual therapy instead of those meditation apps that never work. That manic thought evaporated when zombie Derek snapped his head toward me with a wet crack of his neck, jaw hanging loose like a broken hinge, making a gurgling moan that sounded like the garbage disposal when Mom accidentally drops a spoon in it. The worst part wasn't the rot, the smell, or even the impossible reality of it all. It was his eyes. Behind that milky film, there was recognition. His head tilted slightly, the way it used to when he spotted me trying to hide in the cafeteria. The sound that crawled from his throat was barely recognizable as language, but unmistakably my name. My blood turned to slush in my veins. "You're not real," I whispered, backing away. "You can't be." His jaw worked, black fluid dribbling down his chin. Elliot. Always. Hiding. Something broke inside me then. As 13 years of buried trauma erupted in a volcanic surge of panic and rage, I grabbed the first weapon I could reach, a heavy-duty flashlight, and swung it with all the desperate strength of someone exercising a lifetime of nightmares. The flashlight connected with Derek's temple with a sound like stepping on a rotten watermelon. He reeled back, a rattling hiss escaping his throat as a chunk of flesh tore free. I hit him again and again, each impact vibrating up my arms, until his legs buckled and he collapsed in a heap of rotting flesh and Letterman jacket fragments. Panting, I stared at the crowbar in my hands, dripping with something that looked like motor oil mixed with spoiled gravy. My entire body trembled as I fought the urge to vomit. A hysterical thought floated through my mind. I should have asked if he remembered shoving me into that puddle in front of Melissa Chen in 7th grade. But the universe wasn't done with its sick reunion tour, because behind me, another chunk of floor crumbled away, revealing another gnarled hand clawing upward. This one wore a tarnished class ring, the chunky kind with a fake ruby in the center. Jeff O'Neill's ring, the guy who'd held me down while Derek shoved snow down my pants in 10th grade. I scrambled for the stairs, my sock-covered feet slipping on scattered items. Behind me, Jeff's corpse moaned, a sound like wind through an abandoned building, hollow and hungry, screaming something that might have been no. or possibly just incoherent terror, I bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door, and wedged a kitchen chair under the knob like I'd seen in horror movies. My entire body shook, sweat soaking through my Super Mario t-shirt, and suddenly Mom's voice drifted from the living room. "Elliot? Honey? Are you having one of your episodes?" I stumbled into the hallway on legs that felt like they were made of overcooked spaghetti. "We need to... Mom, something's in the basement, something dead." She looked up from her crochet project, face cycling from mild annoyance to maternal concern. "Dead? Lord, Elliot, if it's another raccoon like last summer..." "It's not a raccoon," I rasped, eyes darting to the basement door, half expecting to see rotting fingers curl around the edge. "It's people. Dead people. But they're moving." She stared at me for a long moment, hook and yarn forgotten in her lap. Her lips parted, but whatever mom script she usually pulled from failed her. Then she set down her project and approached the basement door. "What do you mean, people? Did you bring someone down there?" I grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her cardigan. "Don't open it." The door rattled violently, wood groaning against the chair wedged beneath the knob. Something on the other side pounded. Once, twice, like a fist demanding entry. Mom's mouth fell open, color draining from her face. She glanced at me, searching for any sign this was an elaborate prank. But there was no faking the smell of decay seeping through the crack beneath the door, like roadkill left in the August sun, with notes of something chemical and wrong. After frantic, whispered arguing, punctuated by another jolt when the basement door buckled slightly, we did what any normal people would do when faced with the walking dead, called 911. My hands shook so badly I could barely press the buttons. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, "All operators are currently busy. Please hold for the next available emergency responder." Busy? 911 was busy? That's when the first real chill of dread crawled up my spine. We tried again. Same message. 3rd attempt. "Due to an unusually high call volume, please remain on the line. Your emergency is important to us." Unusually high call volume. Those 5 words told me more than any emergency broadcast ever could. Mom grabbed the remote with trembling fingers, turning on the small TV in the kitchen. The local news was in progress. Not the regular morning show with weatherman Pete and his corny jokes, but a special report. The anchor's makeup couldn't hide the fear in her eyes, her professional smile replaced by tight lips and quick glances off camera. A red banner scrolled beneath her. "Emergency alerts. Stay indoors." Unconfirmed reports of violent attacks. Footage flashed across the screen. People staggering through downtown streets, arms hanging, faces smeared with dark substances. Police barricades hastily assembled. Civilians running, screaming. A camera panned to show paramedics loading someone into an ambulance. Then the body jerked upright, lashing out. The medic's scream cut off as the feed switched back to the studio. The anchor looked like she might be sick. We advise all viewers to remain in their homes. Lock your doors. Authorities are responding to multiple incidents across the county. Mom clutched the remote like a lifeline, knuckles white. "Elliot, oh my God, it's not just here. It's everywhere." I guess so," I whispered, my mind immediately jumping to Dad, who'd left for work at the insurance office an hour ago. A text message from him appeared on Mom's phone. Traffic at a standstill. People acting weird on the highway, trying to get home. Love you. While quickly searching for barricade materials in the garage, I found a dusty folder labeled House History and Permits, perched on a stack of paint cans from when we'd redone the kitchen 7 years ago. I'd never cared about our house's past before, but now it seemed extremely relevant. I flipped through it frantically. Boring stuff at first, deed transfers, inspection reports, receipts for a water heater replacement. Then a notice caught my eye. Unauthorized disposal of medical waste. Cease and desist. The address was ours. What the actual hell? I muttered. Mom abandoned her lookout post to read over my shoulder. We found more disturbing references: in-home alternative treatments, experimental therapies, improper waste disposal, and most alarmingly, potential groundwater contamination. My stomach clenched. "Mom, what do you remember about the people who sold us this house?" She frowned, forehead creasing. "They were this older couple, called themselves holistic healers or something. We got the place cheap because it needed work. They were in a hurry to move." I pointed to a highlighted section mentioning unapproved chemical therapies used on terminally ill patients, meds that apparently needed specialized disposal. So they were basically running a makeshift clinic here, helping desperate people with experimental treatments, then dumping the leftovers God knows where. Mom's face went pale, freckles standing out like ink spots. "You think that's why?" I didn't need her to finish. A memory hit me like a truck. Derek, Jeff, and the others I'd recognized were all from Brighton Middle School, just 4 blocks over. Our subdivision had been built on what was once Willow Creek Farm, then partially used for an expansion of Oak Ridge Cemetery in the 90s. Could these chemicals have somehow seeped into nearby graves? Or was there an entire network of hidden waste under the neighborhood? Fingernails scratched along the other side of the basement door, yanking me from my thoughts. I tried to breathe normally as the implications sank in. These weren't random zombies. They were specifically people I'd known in life, drawn by some twisted, personal gravitational pull. But the entire town was turning too. There had to be more to it than just the basement. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a bang. Mom screamed. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy ceramic vase, before recognizing my dad, sweaty and wild-eyed in his rumpled dress shirt. Lock it now," he shouted. Mom rushed to turn the deadbolt while I shoved a bookcase against the door. Dad bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. "The roads are," he panted, "complete madness. People are attacking each other, biting. Actually biting." He straightened, taking in the barricaded hallway, the pile of furniture against the basement door, and our grim expressions. What in the world happened here? We gathered in the kitchen, the place where we'd had every serious family discussion since I was old enough to remember. Dad paced by the table, his tie hanging loose, hair wild where he'd been running his hands through it. "So you're telling me," he said for the 3rd time, "that we have actual zombies breaking through our basement floor, and they're your old classmates?" "Yes," I said, my voice still shaking despite my best efforts. "I already killed Derek Fuller. Remember him?" Dad's expression hardened. Even after all these years, he remembered how often I'd come home in tears because of Derek. "The kid who cut your hair with scissors in gym class?" "That's him," I confirmed. "Now he's dead." We spread out the documents on the table. The medical waste warnings, the references to terminally ill patients receiving unlicensed treatments. Mom read a line aloud about fervent attempts to cure the incurable. Dad exhaled slowly, leaning over the file. They were trying to help people, but they didn't follow any regulations. They just dumped all those chemicals. It's a tragedy on every level. Mom pressed a hand to her mouth. Those poor patients. And now this is the result? All that effort to save lives twisted into something horrific. "I guess there's a moral question," I said quietly, the images of my dead tormentors flickering in my mind. They were desperate to heal the incurable, but look at what it turned into. Silence draped over us like a funeral shroud. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Regardless of how it started, we have to deal with it now." We stood in silence, the only sound the humming of the refrigerator. Such a normal, everyday noise in the midst of nightmare. Finally, I cleared my throat. "We find the source," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "If we can seal it or neutralize it somehow, maybe we stop more from coming up." Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite read, doubt mixed with something else. Pride, maybe. "You want to go back down there?" Dad asked, gesturing toward the basement. "With those Things? I squared my shoulders, adrenaline making my hands tingle. Unless you'd prefer we sit up here and wait for them to dig through the walls. Because trust me, if they've made one hole, they can make another. We either fix this or get the hell out. But if the whole city's overrun, I let the sentence hang. We all knew there was nowhere safe to run. Mom tapped her fingers on the table, her nervous habit since forever. I'll gather supplies. Todd, is that nail gun still in the garage? He nodded, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Yeah, and some wooden boards, a hammer, a crowbar. We can try to seal any openings once we find where they're coming in. I tried to ignore the mental image of crawling around in a pit of toxic chemicals and partially devoured corpses. I'll lead, I said, forcing confidence into my voice. Mom frowned, worry lines deepening around her eyes. You're sure? I swallowed. I'm not sure about anything anymore, but I need to do this, okay? Those monsters are in my space, my safe place. Dad nodded and clapped my shoulder. The first gesture of its kind in years. All right then, let's gear up. We approached the basement door like it was a portal to hell. I clutched the nail gun in sweaty hands. Dad held his Louisville Slugger from college baseball days, and Mom gripped a crowbar from the garage. The smell hit us like a physical wall, that putrid cocktail of decay and chemicals that made bile rise in my throat. It was death mixed with something artificial and wrong. In the corner lay Derek's remains, exactly where I'd left him. The crowbar attack had caved in half his skull, leaving a mess of blackish fluid and things I didn't want to identify. Mom made a strangled sound, pressing her cardigan sleeve against her mouth. A second hole gaped in the concrete floor, the one Jeff had emerged from. But Jeff himself was nowhere in sight. Dad raised the bat, eyes scanning the shadowy corners. Where is he? A scraping sound from behind my washing machine cut me off. We froze, like prey animals sensing a predator. Step by step, Jeff emerged from the shadows. His Letterman jacket, once the pride of Brighton High, hung in shreds. Half his face was simply gone, revealing yellowed bone and dangling tendons that swung with each movement. I flashed back to him at pep rallies, his booming voice leading chants while I hunched in the bleachers, praying to be invisible. Even in death, some part of him remembered who to target. Elliot, he gurgled, voice wet with decay. Still, a freaking loser. What happened next was a blur of violence and survival instinct. Between the three of us, we managed to put down Jeff's reanimated corpse, but the struggle was shorter this time. Less flailing, more grim efficiency. Mom took a nasty scratch on her arm in the process. Dad's face went pale when he saw the wound, but she assured us it was just a surface injury. Behind Jeff's body, the concrete floor was a disaster of cracks and chunks, exposing damp earth below. A sickly chemical smell rose from the hole, making my eyes water and my nose burn. That must be where he came from, I said, voice barely above a whisper. I crouched, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Deep in the hole, I could make out broken glass, syringes, plastic bags crusted with unidentifiable substances, and deeper still, something that looked like an oil slick, but it moved wrong, shifting with an almost purposeful motion, like crude oil mixed with something alive. Dad whispered a string of curses even Mom didn't scold him for. They really were dumping this crap under our house? Mom crouched beside me, face twisted with disgust. God in heaven, how deep does it go? I swallowed the lump of fear in my throat. Only one way to find out. Sealing the holes from above wouldn't be enough. If these rotting nightmares could tear through concrete, they'd find another way in. We needed to investigate the source itself. Dad fashioned a makeshift rope from heavy-duty extension cords. I hammered pitons into what remained of the concrete floor to create an anchor point. None of us had ever been rock climbing, but we'd watched enough survival shows to fake a passable rig. Mom stepped forward, jaw set with determination. I should go first. I'm the lightest. No, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. It should be me. If something's waiting down there, it's me they want anyway. She blinked, confusion crossing her face. Elliot, that's ridiculous. Is it? I asked with a humorless laugh. It's my old classmates crawling out of the ground, not yours, not Dad's. There's something personal about this, so let me go. Dad studied me for a long moment, then gave a solemn nod. All right, son, but you take this. He handed me his Swiss Army knife, the one he'd carried since his own Boy Scout days. And for God's sake, be careful. I slipped into the hole, wincing as wet dirt squished into my Converse. The smell intensified the deeper I went. Rotten eggs and burnt hair and something metallic that coated the back of my throat. My flashlight beam trembled across what looked like a garbage dump for a mad scientist's lab. Used bandages with crusty brown stains, broken IV bottles, pills dissolved into colorful sludge. The pit narrowed, then widened, forming a tunnel that sloped downward. In some places I could almost stand upright, surrounded by jagged walls of collapsed earth. My mind conjured horrible images, entire graves caving in, corpses tumbling into a toxic bath. Something crunched beneath my foot. I forced myself to look down. Bone fragments, unmistakably human. This wasn't just a casual dumping ground. Bodies had definitely been here. As I crept forward, dripping water echoed from somewhere unseen. Then movement caught the corner of my eye. I froze, heart leaping into my throat, swinging the flashlight wildly. Nothing but lumps of debris and... Wait. The lumps shifted. My beam settled on a half-decayed face, eyes sunken but strangely reflective in the light. It just lay there, not fully reanimated. An unsettling reminder that this chemical sludge didn't always give immediate results. I slipped and slid down the muddy slope. Eventually, I reached a small chamber about the size of my bedroom. The ceiling was a nightmare of exposed pipes and tree roots woven through crumbling dirt. The floor was flooded with an inch of black liquid that reflected my flashlight in sickly rainbows. In the center, rising from this toxic soup like some industrial Excalibur, was a massive rusted metal drum, exactly like the ones you'd see in movies about nuclear waste or chemical spills. Faded lettering was still visible on its side. Property of Sunder Medical Labs. Subject to federal disposal regulations. I almost laughed at the irony. Yeah, great job following those regulations, guys. The drum's lid looked tampered with, partially pried open, with that black sludge seeping out and mixing with the groundwater. My mind raced. If we could close it properly, or bury it under enough sealant, maybe we could stop this madness from spreading further. Then, a scuttling sound behind me. I whirled around, crowbar raised, heart in my throat. A figure lurched from the shadows, so emaciated it barely looked human, more like a skeleton with just enough flesh to hold it together. One eye socket was empty, but the other contained a single bulging eyeball that fixed on me with unmistakable hunger. Even in this state of decay, I recognized her. Samantha Briggs, who'd made my freshman year miserable by spreading rumors about me stuffing my underwear with socks. I wasn't. Elliot, she rasped, voice a dry whisper like pages turning in an old book. You always were such a freak. And you, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. We're always dead inside, Samantha. This is just making it official. Her remaining eye widened slightly, as if the retort had registered somewhere in her decaying brain. Then she lunged, bone-thin fingers reaching for my throat. We grappled briefly in that toxic chamber, and I managed to crush her skull with a single decisive blow. It was savage and brief, but it ended. I stood there afterward, chest heaving with ragged breaths. None of this made sense. Why did all of the zombies happen to be my old classmates? Had they died or did they get infected recently? Was it even really them? Dad's voice drifted down from above. Elliot, you okay down there, son? Yeah, I managed, though okay was galaxies from what I felt. Found the source. It's a big chemical drum. This is definitely where the contamination is coming from. After a quick discussion, We realized that the local hardware store might still have industrial-grade supplies if it wasn't overrun by the infected, but we had little choice. If that drum kept leaking, it might reanimate every corpse within miles. Dad went alone to get supplies, armed with his baseball bat and a determined look I rarely saw outside of Sunday football games. Mom and I spent a tense hour waiting in the living room, eyes constantly moving between the boarded-up front door and the TV screen. The news anchor had vanished, replaced by a technical difficulties screen. Cell networks were jammed. Only an occasional text made it through. Then, through the window, we saw Mr. Weaver from down the street creeping across our lawn. Alive, but desperate. He tried to pry open our side window with a screwdriver. Mom and I locked eyes, disbelief flooding us. I rushed to the window and tapped the glass. "Mr. Weaver, what the hell are you doing?" His face was twisted with fear and anger. "You've got supplies in there, don't you? Water, food. I heard from Peterson you were stocking up for years. Let me in." Mom shook her head. "We can't just open the doors to everyone. People are turning, Mr. Weaver." He snarled at us like a cornered animal. "Then hand out whatever you've got to spare." He rattled the frame until it cracked. I grabbed a chunk of wood to brace the window. "Stop it. We'll share if we can, but you have to calm down." His only reply was to slam the screwdriver against the glass. Another blow, and it might have shattered. Rain pelted his jacket, flattening his gray hair against his skull. I could see the crazed desperation in his eyes, a raw survival instinct that didn't care if we died so long as he got what he needed. Before it came to violence, Dad's car screeched into the driveway. He leaped out with the bat, shouting, "Get off my property, Weaver." Mr. Weaver hesitated, then glanced at the crate of supplies in Dad's trunk. In a heartbeat, he lunged, trying to snatch one of the industrial sealant buckets. Dad swung the bat, not to kill, but to repel. Weaver stumbled back, eyed the tension in Dad's stance, and realized it wasn't worth it. He spat on the ground, a gesture filled with equal parts rage and despair. "You're dooming the rest of us," he shouted. Then he turned and ran off into the storm. My chest felt tight as I opened the door for Dad, hauling him and the supplies in. We'd fended off both the dead and the living now, and it was terrifying how similar that confrontation felt. Dad's face was grim as he brought the buckets inside. "We're in this alone," he said flatly. "No one's coming to help." Without wasting time, we gathered everything Dad managed to scavenge. Sealant, quick-dry cement, tools, ropes, flashlights, anything that might help us contain the nightmare beneath our house. We returned to the basement. The bodies of Derek, Jeff, and Samantha lay where we'd left them, grim reminders of what waited if we failed. In the chamber, Dad spread industrial sealant over the leaking drum, thick goo that smelled like a chemical factory. I followed with quick-dry cement, building a makeshift dam around its base. We worked in near silence, the only sounds our labored breathing and the occasional splash of toxic water. At one point, a gurgling moan froze us in place. Dad spun around, crowbar ready. But it was only Samantha's corpse shifting in the black puddle, truly dead. Mom used the nail gun to reinforce boards against the tunnel walls. We formed a weird, apocalyptic assembly line, a family project from hell. Finally, we stepped back to assess our work. The drum was sealed, the soil around it saturated with binding agent. Black water still pooled at our feet, but the main leak appeared contained. If the cement held, the worst of the contamination might be entombed. We climbed back up, muscles burning with exhaustion. Collapsing on the basement floor, we stared at each other with a mixture of disbelief and cautious relief. Did we actually do it? Mom asked between ragged breaths. Dad pressed a trembling hand against the fresh cement we'd poured into the hole from above. If we're lucky, it'll hold. Lucky seemed like a stretch, but at least we'd tried. We spent the next few hours trying to decontaminate ourselves. Mom insisted we strip down to underwear in the laundry room, scrubbing our skin with bleach water until it turned pink and raw. Dad half joked, Probably more chemicals on us now than from the basement. Mom's laugh was high-pitched and brittle. I noticed Dad wincing as he washed his arm, how the wound looked darker around the edges than a normal cut should. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. Not just concern or worry, but genuine primal fear. "Dad?" I murmured, keeping my voice low so Mom couldn't hear over the running water. "That scratch. It's nothing," he cut me off, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just needs cleaning." "Dad, if you got bit..." "I said it's nothing." His voice rose sharply, then fell just as quickly when Mom glanced over. "Let's just get through tonight, okay? We'll figure everything out in the morning." That cold feeling returned to my stomach, but I pushed it away. We had more immediate problems. Eventually, clean but exhausted, we gathered in the living room. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, punctuated by occasional screams and what sounded disturbingly like gunshots. The power flickered on and off. Our phones displayed emergency services only where the signal bars should be. "Should we try 911 again?" Mom asked, hugging her knees to her chest on the couch. "They're overwhelmed," I reminded her, remembering the busy signals and automated messages. "It's chaos everywhere." Dad leaned back in his recliner, eyelids heavy, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool air. "At least we sealed our source. Maybe that helps this neighborhood. Or maybe it doesn't change a thing. But it's all we could do." We fell silent, listening to the disturbing soundtrack of the world falling apart outside our walls. Mom eventually stood and peeked through a gap in the curtains. I joined her, our shoulders touching as we stared out. Two shambling figures in tattered clothes stumbled past our driveway. One turned toward our window, as if sensing the warmth of living flesh inside. Even from a distance I could see the vacant stare, the unnatural angle of its neck. A chill ran through me. At some point, exhaustion won over fear, and I drifted into uneasy sleep, with Mom's gentle hand on my shoulder as my comfort. Morning arrived with gray, watery light filtering through our curtains. Rain pattered against the windows, turning the front yard into a swamp. Dad was still asleep on the couch, his skin pale and clammy, his breathing shallow. To feel normal for 5 minutes, I took a shower, half expecting black sludge to pour from the faucet or zombie hands to burst through the drain. But it was just lukewarm water hitting the chipped porcelain tub. For a blissful moment, I pretended everything was fine. Just Elliot, the basement-dwelling introvert, getting clean after a rough night. But just then, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap from somewhere beyond the bathroom. My heart leaped into my throat. I turned the water off, goosebumps rising on my wet skin as I listened. Tap, tap. Not from inside the walls, but from outside, near the basement windows or maybe the living room. I dried off hastily, pulled on yesterday's clothes, and went to investigate. The living room was empty, Mom's voice drifting faintly from the kitchen where she was talking softly to Dad. Another tap-tap. Steeling myself, I approached the front window and peered through a gap in the curtains. A figure stood on our porch, pressing against the glass. My lungs seized. Through the rain-streaked pain, I recognized the face, or what remained of it. Sunken cheeks, milky eyes, skin mottled with decay. But the faded Brighton Middle School band t-shirt was unmistakable. Carl Jenkins, the clarinet player forced to sit beside me in 8th grade because alphabetical seating put Jenkins next to Johnson. Not a bully exactly, but a silent witness to my torment. He'd never once spoken up when Derek pulled my chair away or Jeff stole my sheet music. He'd just watched with that same blank expression he wore now in death. He tapped the window with a blackened fingernail, a grotesque parody of a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. His vacant eyes somehow seemed fixed on me, his jaw slack in a silent moan. The realization hit like a punch. We'd sealed the basement, but the contamination had spread farther than we thought. Or maybe the entire town was now a playground for the dead. No. We did everything we could, I told myself, backing away from the window. The tapping grew more insistent, like impatient knocking. Carl pressed his decayed palm against the glass, leaving a smear of dark fluid. Then, from the kitchen, came a crash and Mom's scream. I ran toward the sound, heart hammering against my ribs. Dad was on the floor, convulsing, foam bubbling from his lips. Mom knelt beside him, trying to hold him steady. "Elliot, help me," she cried. I dropped to my knees, grabbing Dad's shoulders. His skin burned through his shirt, and his eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the seizure stopped. He went limp, chest still rising and falling, but barely. "We need to get him to a hospital," Mom sobbed. "Mom, the streets are overrun," I reminded her gently. "And even if we could get there, what could they do? This isn't normal." She looked at me, face crumpling. "He was bitten, wasn't he? And he didn't tell us." I nodded, throat tight. "I think so. I saw the wound earlier, but he didn't want us to worry." "Typical Todd," she whispered, a broken laugh escaping her. "Always trying to protect everyone else." Dad's breathing had grown shallower, his skin taking on a waxy pallor. We moved him to the couch, covered him with blankets, and took turns wiping his forehead with cool cloths. All the while, Carl continued tapping at the window, joined now by other figures shambling across our lawn. "They're surrounding the house," Mom observed, peering through the blinds. "Like they know we're in here." "They probably can smell us," I said grimly, "or sense our body heat. Whatever's left of their brains still works enough for hunting." We triple-checked every door and window, making sure nothing could get in without serious effort. If the zombies wanted to join us for lunch, they'd need to break through reinforced glass and our barricades. "Let's just pray the windows hold," I murmured, watching Carl's shadow move past the kitchen blinds. Dad's condition deteriorated rapidly. Around midnight, his breathing changed, becoming ragged, wet, like something was filling his lungs. Mom and I exchanged a look of helpless despair. We both knew what was happening, but neither wanted to say it aloud. I retreated to my childhood bedroom for a few minutes, trying to gather my courage for what might come next. My phone showed missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. With the little battery I had left, I listened to voicemails. Panicked voices, crying. Someone saying they'd seen their grandmother try to eat their dog. Another from my cousin Tyler, who I hadn't spoken to since Christmas. "Elliot, if you get this, be careful, man. It's a complete shit show out here." A text appeared, the last gasp of the dying cellular network. "You can't hide forever. We're coming." My heart slammed against my ribs. Was this a prank? A glitch? Zombies couldn't text, right? Unless it wasn't zombies. What if living people were out there, desperate or dangerous? Like Mr. Weaver. What if others saw our boarded windows and assumed we were hoarding supplies? I turned my phone off to save battery, and to stop the parade of horrors my imagination was staging. I woke with a jolt around 3 a.m., every nerve ending electric with the certainty that something was wrong. The darkness pressed against my eyeballs, thick as oil, but my ears caught it. That familiar, horrifying scratch from downstairs. Not just outside anymore. Inside. Close. My basement in danger radar, honed through years of paranoid preparation, screamed to life. I slipped out of bed, the floor cold against my bare feet. Each board a potential betrayal ready to announce my movements to whatever waited below. I crept toward my parents' room first, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Mom sat beside the bed where Dad lay, his skin waxy and gray in the intermittent light, dark veins mapping his face like rivers on a dying planet. Mom's head had fallen forward in exhaustion, her fingers still intertwined with his. "Mom," I whispered, touching her shoulder gently. She startled awake, eyes wild with momentary confusion before focusing on me. "Elliot, what is it, honey?" "Something's in the house," I said, the words burning my throat like acid. "The basement. I think they found another way in." As if to confirm my words, a crash echoed from downstairs, followed by that wet, gurgling moan I'd come to recognize as the language of the dead. Mom's face drained of color, her eyes darting to Dad's unconscious form. "We need to move him," she whispered, panic threading her voice. But we both knew it was impossible. Dad was too far gone, the infection having reduced him to a feverish shell that might at any moment become one of them. And even if we could move him, where would we go? The world outside had descended into madness days ago. Another crash, closer now. The sound of splintering wood. "Stay with Dad," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'll check it out." Mom's fingers dug into my arm. "No, Elliot, don't. We don't have a choice." I gently pried her fingers loose. "Someone has to." In that suspended moment, balanced on the knife's edge between life and death, past and future, hiding and standing, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not courage exactly, but acceptance. The certainty that whatever came next, whether I survived the night or joined the ranks of the walking dead, I had finally, truly grown up. And as the dead crowded in from all sides, their moans rising in hungry anticipation, I realized with perfect clarity, this was always how it was going to end. Not with me hiding safely while the world burned, but with me standing in the flames, fighting for those I loved until the very last breath. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.